Hello and welcome to the Snickerdoodle Knits YouTube channel. I am Jessica, the knitting designer and teacher behind Snickerdoodle Knits. In this video, I am going to demonstrate how to work the trellis stitch repeat. So this here is a sample of trellis stitch. This is just one repeat, and I'll go ahead and walk through the steps of this stitch motif in this video. So the reason I'm recording this right now is because I used the trellis stitch in the Gracefully shawl, which was originally designed as a mystery knit along for Tippy Tree Yarns in July of 2021, and it was supposed to be themed around Grace Kelly. So this trellis stitch, I think it's really interesting and a fun stitch to work, but this here that creates the triangle might be a new technique to you. And so I want to go ahead and demonstrate the whole repeat so you know how to create these slip stitches and then how to catch those floats up here. So there's just a couple of techniques that I think will be helpful to go ahead and demonstrate the whole thing, even though a lot of it is really just knits and purls. Now this, of course, is just a square swatch, so it doesn't include all of the increases and additional stitches like the shawl does, since this shawl is increasing in size. But it does have the same main repeat for the motif. So this is just, the first two stitches are just the edge that I have created to help the swatch lay flat. And then the first row, well, there's just one side stitch here. The main repeat is to purl 3 and then slip 3. So when we do our slip 3, that's going to be slipping 3 purlwise with the yarn in the front. So we'll purl 3, so that's just normal purl. And then slip 3 purlwise with the yarn in front. So you can slip them individually, or I just like to slip them all together. So slipping 3 purlwise. So to slip purlwise, you just bring your needle in as if to purl, but we're just slipping onto the other stitches. And because the yarn is in the front, we just left it there. But you want to be sure you have your yarn in the front when you're slipping those stitches. And then we purl 3. Now I definitely recommend you make sure this float here is plenty long, because then like here down at the bottom, I didn't leave my floats as long, and so it definitely pinches up the fabric a bit. And so it makes it nice and flat fabric, as if you make sure this float here is plenty long in front of those stitches. So we're just purling 3. And then slipping 3 with the yarn in front and do that purlwise. And again, just purl 3. So you'll notice that if you've already worked one repeat and you're working this row again, this row 1, that we will be slipping these stitches that look like knit stitches and purling the stitches that look like purl stitches. And the other thing to remember is that whenever we're slipping stitches so that we have a float in front, we always want the float on the right side of the fabric. So all of the floats will always be on the same side of the fabric, and you want it on the right side of the fabric. So I slipped 3, and now I purl 3. And then there's one side stitch and then my border. So that is row 1, and that is how we create those floats in the first place. Now, for row 2, I have my border here, and then a side stitch, and then the main repeat is knit 3, slip 3. So again, you'll notice that we're knitting the stitches that look like knit stitches, And then we're going to purl this, we're going to slip the stitches that look like purl stitches. And you'll see that those stitches there, that's where the previous float is. So we're just going to create a float on top of the existing float. So we're going to knit 3 and then slip 3 purlwise with the yarn in the back. So go ahead and leave your yarn in the back and then slip these 3 stitches purlwise. And again, remember to keep that float nice and long so it's not going to be too tight. And then we knit 3. And slip 3. And again, keep that float nice and long. Knit 3. Slip 3. Knit 3. And I just have 1 extra stitch and then my border. So that was row 2. Now we have a couple of rows of basically just knits and purls, and what we're going to do is we're going to purl the stitches that look like purl stitches, so like here with the purl bumps, and we're going to knit the stitches that we've been slipping here, so they look like knit stitches. I'm going to slip those. So row 3, just my border, and then 1 side stitch, and now we do purl 3, knit 3, so these stitches that we had slipped, going to knit those, purl 3, and again those are the stitches that look like purl stitches that we're going to purl. Knit 3, purl 3, and that's just the repeat, of course, is knitting 3 and purling 3 across. So there's knit 3, purl 3. All right, sorry about that. My camera quit recording. So, basically, we were just knitting and purling across. I have 1 side stitch and then my border there. So that is the end of row 3. Now the row 4 is basically just the opposite. We're going to continue to knit what looks like knit stitches and purl what looks like purl stitches, but then of course since we're on the back, it's the opposite of what it was. So now instead of purl 3, knit 3, we are doing knit 3, purl 3. So I have 1 side stitch and then, oops, that's supposed to be purled. 1 side stitch and then we have our knit 3, purl 3. So here, these stitches look like knit stitches, so we're just going to knit those. These look like purl stitches, so we'll purl those, and we just continue that across the row. So knit 3, purl 3, knit 3, purl 3, knit 3, purl 3, knit 3, and I just have 1 side stitch that I purl, and then I have my 2 border stitches. So that's row 4. Now row 5, this is where it gets fun. This is my favorite part. So those are my 2 border stitches, and now we knit 5 and we catch the floats, knit 5, catch the floats, and so on. So we're going to pick up these floats here, these strands, and we're essentially going to wrap it behind this stitch here that is in the center of those floats. So remember how we slipped 3? We're going to be working with that center stitch of those 3 to catch our floats. So we'll go ahead and knit 5, and then we catch our float on this stitch. So bring your right tip, the right needle, below both floats here, below both strands, and just bring your needle up through. So now those floats are sitting over your right needle. Now we're just going to knit this first stitch on the left needle, which remember that was the center stitch of those floats. And then what we're going to do is we're going to bring these two slipped floats over this stitch and off the needle. So over that stitch and off the needle, and just let it go. So now those floats have been wrapped around the back of this stitch. Now we knit 5, and we're going to catch those floats again. So I'm going to unwind some yarn here. It's getting short on me. All right, bring the right tip below both strands, pick those up, make sure you're not picking up any other stitches from the fabric, and just have them wrapped around that needle. Knit your first stitch, and then slide these two over and off the stitch on your right hand needle. And then we'll knit 5, and we'll do that one more time. 2, 3, 4, 5. All right. Bring the right tip under the floats and just bring the needle up. Knit the first stitch on the left needle, and then bring those floats over the stitch and off the needle. And if you find it helpful, oftentimes I kind of hold on to that stitch with my thumb just to make sure it doesn't get slipped off. And that's that. So we knit 5, and then I have my 2 border stitches. And so really that's the whole idea of the whole trellis stitch. What we do with the second half of the repeat is we offset it. So what we did here was this bottom repeat part here, and now the second half we'll go ahead and work the floats offset, so they'll happen over here. So I'll go ahead and demonstrate all of that, but also know if you feel confident with what I've already talked about, really you're good to work on the pattern. All right, so row 6, we're actually just repeating row 3. Those are my 2 border stitches there, and I have 1 side stitch, that's a knit 1, and then the repeat is purl 3, knit 3. So what we're doing is actually, we're purling 3 and knitting 3, but when we knit the 3, I find it helpful to notice that the middle of the 3 stitches is where I caught those floats, and always it's kind of sits back behind the other stitches from those floats that were wrapped around it. So I find that helpful to make sure that I'm in the right spot. So we'll purl 3 and then knit 3, and that second one here is the one that has the floats wrapped around it. So 2, 3, purl 3, knit 3, and again there's my wrapped floats, so I know that I'm counting correctly, haven't messed up anything. Purl 3, knit 3, there's my floats, purl 3, and then I just have 1 side stitch and my 2 border stitches. So that's row 6. Now row 7, we have 2 side stitches, And then this is where we will do our excuse me, where we will do our first row of slip stitches to create our float. So we will purl our first side stitch. That's just for working in the square. Of course, you'll have different numbers in the shawl because again, you're increasing stitches. So row 7, slip 3. So remember, we are slipping 3 purlwise with the yarn in front. Remember again, we want all of our floats on the right side of the fabric. So when you're slipping, you want to make sure your yarn is always on this side of the fabric that you already have your floats on. And we're going to slip 3 purlwise with the yarn in front. And then we purl 3. So we're purling these 3 here. So really we're purling what looks like purl stitches, and we are slipping what looks like knit stitches. So these 3 slip purlwise with the yarn in front, and then purl 3. And again, try to keep those floats long and loose so you don't keep your fabric all tight. Slip 3, purl 3, slip 3, and I just have one side stitch here. Purl, and then I have my 2 border stitches. So that is row 7. Now row 8, have my 2 border stitches, and then I knit 1 side stitch, and we're going to slip 3 and then knit 3. So remember, make sure our yarn is in the back because we want those floats on this side of the fabric here where we had our floats before. So we slip 3 purlwise with the yarn in back. And then we knit the stitches that look like knit stitches. So knit 3, and if you need to, you can pull this a little bit after you knit the first stitch. That can help just to loosen that yarn. So knitting 3, slipping 3 purlwise with the yarn in the back, knitting 3, slipping 3, knitting 3, slipping 3, whoops, and then knit 1 side stitch, and then I have my 2 border stitches. So there we have 2 rows of floats, which is exactly what we want. Okay, so now row 9 is exactly the same as row 4. Of course, when you're doing the shawl, it's not exactly the same because of the increases again, but the main repeat is the same. So we have a purl 1 for the slide stitch, and then we're going to be knitting the slip stitches, purling what looks like purl stitches. So we knit 3, then we purl 3, then we knit 3, we purl 3, knit 3, purl 3, knit 3, purl my 1 side stitch, and then, goodness, I keep slipping my stitches, or dropping my stitches. All right, then my 2 border stitches. So that was row 9. Row 10 is the same repeat as row 3. And again, we're just knitting what looks like knitting stitches, purling what looks like purled stitches. Here, I have a little fuzzy. And so it's just the opposite of the last row. So we're going to knit the 2 border stitches here, and then we knit the first side stitch, and we're going to purl 3, knit 3 across. So purl 3, knit 3, purl 3, knit 3, purl 3, knit 3, purl 3, and then we knit the one side stitch and then 2 border stitches. So that's row 10, and now row 11 is when we catch our floats. So we knit, the repeat is knit 5, and I catch the floats with the way it's off-centered here. I'm going to need to knit 2 side stitches. So I knit my 2 border stitches, and then I knit 2 side stitches, and that puts me at the center of the floats here. So I go ahead and catch this float, bringing the right needle below the floats, knitting the first stitch on the left needle, and bringing the floats up and over, stitch that's left on your needle, and off the needle there. Then we knit 5 and catch these floats. So bring the needle under, knit into this first stitch, and bring those floats off the needle. And knit 5. Catch these floats. Whoops. Grab both of them on the right needle, knit the first stitch, and drop those floats off the right needle. And then knit 5. And catch these floats. And then I just knit 2 side stitches, and then I have my border stitches. And that's row 11, where we caught our floats again. And so the last row is a repeat. It's row 12, and we're just working across the back, and that is repeating row 4. So row 4, we had 1 purl stitch for the side, and then our repeat is knit 3, purl 3. And again, my little trick for this part is, you know, when you're counting or picking up your work or whatever, to make sure you're at the right spot, your knit 3s are centered around the stitch that had caught the floats. So I'll knit 1, 2, 3. That second stitch has the floats, and then I'll be purling 3, and then the knit 3 will be centered around this stitch that had the floats that were caught, and then purling 3, and then my knit stitches will be centered around this float here, purling 3, and then knit stitches centered around here. So let's go ahead and knit 3, purl 3, knit 3, purl 3, knit 3, there's one of the floats, so I'm still in the right spot, purl 3, knit 3, there's one of the floats, and just purl 1, and knit the last 2 for my border. And that is a full repeat of the trellis stitch, so 12 rows in total. And here, what you've seen, since I already had 1 repeat completed before I started the video, is 2 complete repeats of the trellis stitch. So this here is 1 repeat, this here was another repeat. And that's the trellis stitch. So I hope you found this video helpful, informative, and easy to follow. If you have any questions about any of the steps where you're a little bit confused, I recommend going back and replaying the video. You can slow down the speed if you find that helpful. And then if you still have questions, go ahead and leave those in the comments. I'm happy to address those. And if you found the video helpful, please hit the like button, and you can subscribe to the Snickerdoodle Knits YouTube channel for additional knitting tutorial content like this. I also have knitting pattern overview, design overview videos for each of the patterns that I have designed. So I walk you through the details of what's included in the design, the sizing, the yarn, all of that kind of information before you ever purchase the pattern. So I hope to see you around, and happy knitting!